Okay, looks like we're live now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Data Strategies for the Modern Healthcare Leader. We'll be talking about some of the challenges that healthcare organizations face today, challenges such as constantly changing regulations around patient privacy, consumer expectations and how they have been evolving over time, technological readiness, etc. We will also look at what measures can be taken to address and get a handle on these challenges and meet consumer expectations while respecting their privacy and at the same time protecting your brand's reputation. My name is Nirmal Vimana. I'm the product lead for healthcare and life sciences here at Tealium. In addition to owning the healthcare and life sciences product vertical, I provide thought leadership and subject matter expertise within the organization and across the industry as time permits. Prior to joining Tealium, I was working at different healthcare and pharma organizations for more than a decade. We have with us two leading industry leaders from our great partner, BlastX Consulting. I will let them introduce themselves. Joe, let's start with you.
Hey everyone, I'm Joe Christopher. I'm the VP of Technology Solutions at BlastX Consulting. I've been at BlastX Consulting for over 17 years now, and I make my mark on healthcare clients by helping them navigate the MarTech and digital analytics challenges that they face as covered entities. Pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Joe. Richard?
Yeah, hey everybody, my name is Richard Mora. I'm the Senior Director of MarTech Engineering here at Blast, which means I get to lead all the fun implementation and integration efforts, including healthcare. And before this, I implemented a number of CDP strategies for healthcare and pharma clients. So great to be here. Thanks, Nirmal.
Thank you, Richard. All right, let's dive right in. So we said we would be talking about challenges faced by healthcare organizations. Why don't we start with one of the biggest ones? And this would be the constantly changing rules and regulations around patient privacy. I would like to hear your take on this, and especially the recent court ruling around the AHA, that is the American Hospital Association's lawsuit against the OCR Bulletin and HHS regarding online tracking. Joe, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Nirmal. So you're absolutely correct that there's been a lot of changes in regulations over the past few years and even recently that we've seen. And so let's remember that aside from these changes, the underpinning focus should not have changed for healthcare covered entities. The focus should have always been on sound protection of data and usage of that data to improve the patient experience, right? That's the charge. And so let's do a quick flashback or just over the past 2 years or so, just to show how much has actually changed. So back in 2022, the Office for Civil Rights and HHS issued clarifying guidance on the use of online tracking technologies and started talking about unauthenticated web pages. Then in July 2023, HHS FTC sent cautionary letters to 130 covered entities stating concerns on their use of Google Analytics and the Meta Pixel. Then in March 2024 this year, there was yet another update to the bulletin expanding on the definition of PHI, especially in the case of unauthenticated web pages. And so these changes have caught some healthcare organizations off guard. Often it was the organizations that didn't have the right data foundations to pivot with the changes. And I've directly seen healthcare organizations that just decided to completely remove their digital analytics and marketing tags. And while that helps you quickly reach compliance, it's very short-sighted in regards to leveraging data to deliver on the experience. And there's better options today that I'm sure we'll be talking about in more detail. And finally, Nirmal, you asked about the AHA lawsuit against the HHS, and this happened just last month, very recent. And at a high level, the judge ruled in favor of the AHA, stating that the online tracking bulletin was unlawful and beyond their authority. And so while this may be welcome news on the surface, in my opinion, it really doesn't change too much for healthcare organizations that are serious about digital experience of its patients and members. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later today.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, agree with your take, Joe. So one thing we can be sure of is that regulations will keep changing. And this recent AHA lawsuit ruling, in my opinion, only proves that, right? So an organization should ask themselves, do they want to be at the mercy of lawsuits and regulatory agencies and bodies loosening their definition of PHI and what privacy means before they take action? I don't think so. I think their mindset should be proactive and not reactive. That means having a data framework and strategy that really allows them to be nimble and agile in the face of regulations changing and the whole regulatory landscape constantly shifting. This would set them up, I believe, for long-term success rather than relying on any given lawsuit or ruling going in their favor and hoping the regulations will keep changing in a way that they can take action without worrying about some sort of violation. Awesome. So let's move on to the next question, and I'm going to pose this to you, Richard. So we know that healthcare in general is becoming increasingly digital. Do you see any new threats to data, patient data, consumer data, as things like virtual care are becoming more popular, and especially in conjunction with the definition of PHI getting broader and broader as time goes on?
Yeah, I think the threat is essentially two parts. One, as Joe mentioned, companies not having the right data foundation, and you also mentioned it, being able to carry that as requirements change. But I think the other one is realizing that within that, the people, the processes, the technologies are constantly changing. And those are always threats to any business, even with PII and PHI. So we need to realize that healthcare organizations are businesses, much like retail businesses or business-to-business type businesses who need to sell. And in this instance, I mean, the threat is that consumer expectations across the realm are expecting to be more personalized, less friction oriented. And on the other side of that, we're looking at healthcare organizations that are trying to meet those consumers in places they want, such as you mentioned, virtual healthcare. And based upon that, like, they need to solve for this and constantly solve for this. So the threats are there, but yes, the businesses need to respond. They need to carry forward with all the solutions to all the things we discussed.
Makes sense. Joe, what would be your take on this?
Yeah, so going back to my example where I stated that I've seen healthcare organizations just completely rip out their digital analytics, digital marketing tags in response. I think it should be an obvious statement that if you abandon using this data, you can't meet rising patient expectations. And so conversely, if you use data in ways that violate regulations, you're going to be subjected to monetary fines, erosion of consumer trust, and this can destroy your brand, right? And so these changing regulations cannot be ignored, and it's about that data foundation. And so to properly personalize and orchestrate the best patient experiences, this is going to require data across many different sources. And the great news is that MarTech has matured in the past few years, and there's some great ways to do all of this. And that's one component of that technology people process. Yeah, there's some great ways that we can talk about further.
Makes sense. Yeah, I feel like threats are on the rise. Yes, there are new data threats, there are new channels, there are new ways in which digital data can be siphoned off. And it's happening due to a confluence of factors like consumer expectations changing. That means they want more digital channels they can engage on. People and processes changing or things going wrong there. And the sheer number of possibilities that today's like MarTech capabilities are able to unlock. But I think I'm hearing you say, which to me is interesting, is this doesn't mean organizations can avoid using data. If they are thinking by not using data, they can avoid regulatory violations, they would be mistaken. Because not using the data means they cannot serve their customers in the way the consumers and the customers expect to be served. And if they are doing it for regulatory reasons, due to fear of committing a HIPAA violation, for example, but that is, to me, uninformed. Given the advancements in MarTech, they can gain that fine-grained control of data, patient data that they're collecting, and they can control in what manner this data is then being leveraged to create those personalized consumer-centric experiences for the end customer without violating the consumer's trust or committing any regulatory violations. So data should be leveraged, and it's only in their best interest to do so.
That's right.
Awesome. Let's see. So what other challenges do you see healthcare organizations facing? So we talked about regulatory challenges, constantly changing regulations, new threats given the digital landscape and how it's been evolving. What other challenges do you come across in your engagement with healthcare organizations? I'll start with you, Joe.
Sure. So there's countless studies that show that a major point of frustration and low patient satisfaction is the lack of a personalized experience. So much so that I came across one study by Dynata that even said that over half of consumers would rather go to the DMV or serve jury duty than have to deal with a health insurance issue. So experience is a competitive differentiator, and any experience that is fragmented or creates unnecessary friction reduces adoption, and it reduces that adoption and continued use. And so the potential benefits of, say, virtual healthcare, it could be lost if users are met with bad experiences. And we all want these digital experiences because they're convenient. It respects our time, it can be personalized, and can even lead to improved outcomes when incorporated with things like remote continuous monitoring of chronic conditions, as an example. And so, additionally, on the personalization side, this can lead to an experience that includes personalized treatment plans based on your individual health data and history. The personalization needs to be visible in the member web and app portals, and healthcare organizations need to measure the effectiveness of that. And so finally, as we look ahead into the integration of AI with the patient experience, the groundwork needs to be in place with your data, how you use it, and how you can improve the patient experience.
So that DMV analogy was awesome. I feel like that should raise some red flags within the industry if nothing else does. So I feel like from what I'm hearing, not providing a personalized, unified customer experience itself should be treated as a threat. The reason being, organizations, by not doing so, would be missing out on new and effective and cool ways to engage their patients and their target audience in a sort of integrated fashion, especially when you throw in things like remote monitoring, smart devices, wearables, AI, etc. So there is a lot of cool tech and channels that they could be leveraging to serve their customers in a very intuitive fashion. But by not leveraging data, they would be missing out and leaving those opportunities on the table. And my take also is that organizations have to remember that patients and consumers have a lot of purchasing power. If the healthcare experience that they're getting from a particular provider organization is not satisfactory to them, they are free to look elsewhere. They will go looking elsewhere. So there is also the benefit to provider organizations by doing personalization, earning and maintaining the patient's loyalty, their customers' loyalty. And, we talk about personalization and patient personalization, insurance member personalization comes up a lot. But one area of personalization that I don't see being talked about not enough is physician personalization. So as provider organizations, they try to increase their patient referrals, or as they try to attract top talent, given how competitive recruitment can be, they need to understand what is making physicians tick, understanding their physician referral patterns, like what made them refer a patient to a particular specialist organization in the past, or what attracted them to join certain organizations. Like knowing these data points, knowing these insights, and creating a personalized experience, not just for patients, but even for physicians, can be a very powerful tool in, again, ultimately improving patient health outcomes. I mean, you want patients getting the right care by them coming to your organization, and you want the best of breed physicians. You want the best in the market joining your organization. So it all points to improving health outcomes for your patients. Cool. So all three of us, we are in agreement on the benefits of consumer personalization, whether it's, patient, member, or even physician, as I pointed out. But not every healthcare customer, a prospect I speak to, feels ready to deliver such personalized experiences. Reasons are, there are multiple reasons, but in general, the theme I'm saying is like, we're not ready for it. So for organizations that don't feel ready, what would you say to them? What sort of mindset should they adapt, do you think? Jim?
Yeah, Jamal, it's a good question. And, I would say to them that, like I've been saying so far today, that experience is a competitive advantage and differentiator, and this needs to be a top priority. But we also do need to have an understanding of their reality that's leading to this not being ready perception. And so, in order to deliver the best digital experiences, a again, recognizing that many healthcare organizations, they're still operating with legacy systems that can be difficult to meet in the areas of like integration and real-time data availability. And these data silos, they can be significant and really prevent that unified view of the patient. Additionally, there's the continued regulatory uncertainty, almost to the point of inaction. So healthcare organizations, they can be hesitant to invest, fearing that their approaches may become non-compliant in the future. And to this, I say that there's no room for shortcuts, and by building the right foundation and infrastructure, you can be better prepared for this uncertainty by pivoting with the change instead of allowing the change to be chaotic and disruptive. And finally, there's the people and skill gap. And so combined with, so many other important initiatives in the evolving healthcare landscape, there can be a shortage of talent that understands how to navigate the MarTech landscape and achieve personalized healthcare experiences while also understanding the healthcare regulation side of things. And there's plenty of us that do have that experience to navigate these waters, and we can help assess, that organizational readiness.
Awesome. Yeah, that all makes perfect sense to me. So we could even sort of look at it in a philosophical sense, correct? So it can be overwhelming to think about all the gaps, all these shortcomings that need to be addressed, whether it's technology, mindset, having the right people, skills, or whatever it might be. But I think acknowledging that these gaps exist could be a critical first step in beginning the consumer personalization journey. So they are nothing to be shunned. Acknowledge them. Without acknowledging them, there is no progress that can be made in this critical step, I would imagine. Great. So we talked about challenges that organizations are facing, have been facing. Now let's pivot and talk about strategies and solutions to address these challenges. So we spoke about regulatory challenges and the constantly changing regulatory landscape. What do you think are some of the things that you've seen organizations do to keep up with changing regulations? I will ask you, Joe.
Yeah. So first, there's the compliance and governance aspect of things. And for whatever reason, this is often treated differently in digital analytics and digital marketing. And to be just more explicit on that, I mean, it's less mature. And part of it is a lack of understanding between privacy teams and marketing or product teams that, and another part is that there's a faulty understanding of what can be done with the right technology. So my recommendation is to establish a dedicated compliance team that's cross-functional, and this team needs to monitor those regulatory changes. Also there needs to be regular risk assessments and automated monitoring of new risks. So for example, who approves and who is notified when data is sent to a new third-party destination? Who has those controls and monitoring, right? What about the existing third parties where they're approved, but somehow the scope of the data that's being sent to them has changed? Like, how did that change happen? Who knew about it? And so forth. Who catches it? But Richard, I'm curious, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll go a layer deeper and add my MarTech perspective to kind of what you're driving at, Joe. And specifically what I've seen as a strategy is documenting the different roles within the organization and how they interact with the data, but also how that essentially maps to the different systems. And that creates that environment of knowledge and control to some degree of understanding really where's the data going, how are the processes protecting the data or ensuring that risk is limited. And then as it maps down to the systems, understanding what controls are in place to ensure that the right people and or the right vendors even and the right systems are receiving the data that they're supposed to, but not also creating risk or data leaks or non-approved data to go downstream. That's going to be a big problem that a lot of people are worried about. And I think the last piece is just ensuring that as you build your infrastructure, that your vendors are signing a business associates agreement. It's a big thing that we ensure when we work with our clients, and more popularly known as a BAA, since we like to use acronyms in this industry. But you understand that that allows you to move down that road of HIPAA compliance. And the great thing about Tealium is they're willing to sign that BAA, and they've been a great partner in working with us and a number of our healthcare clients and ensuring that we have those degrees of not only control, but also moving into that realm of the right compliance pieces in place.
Makes perfect sense. And yeah, I think BAA has almost become a buzzword, interestingly enough. And HIPAA has been around for such a long time, but ever since the OCR bulletin 2 years ago, terms like BAA, business associates, and compliant analytics, this and that, everything has become so much more common in the industry, which is good, which means there is awareness being created. Back to what you were saying, I agree. The more all these functions like privacy, analytics, and marketing, the more they stay in their own lanes, the less they are engaging customers in a way that's meaningful. By staying in their respective lane, for example, privacy teams may simply be so focused on compliance and not appreciate the full potential of the patient data that has been collected that could be used to engage these patients in a compliant fashion. And if analytics and marketing teams and website ownership teams, if they stay in their own lane, they then become so focused on unlocking user insights and engaging the customer without necessarily staying on top of the latest regulations and laws. And these laws and regulations are rapidly changing, as we talked about. Instead, when there is cross-team collaboration and a cross-functional compliance team that can sort of provide that end-to-end expertise, whether it's data collection or management or activation for engaging the patient, and that's I like that term, Joe, cross-functional compliance team. So when this is the reality, all functions can work with each other, they can learn from one another, and ultimately give the customer what they want without breaking any laws, without damaging their brand reputation. Cool. So, now we venturing into compliance again a little bit. So how do you see consent figuring into all of this? What role does consent play? And how critical is patient or member consent in your view? Richard.
Yeah, I mean, consent starts the data lineage chain that you need to have, right? If never presume data has been consented for use, you have to be explicitly get that from those that you are going to track or going to downstream use that to enhance the consumer experience, and also be very clear as to how you're going to use that data. So if you're collecting email address per se, and you're sending that downstream for some effort, be very transparent as how you're leveraging that identifier, but also how is it going to help them in the end. I think a lot of companies shy away from the applications of data and really being transparent as what they're doing with that. And I think as a consumer, even myself, I would appreciate that if someone is tracking or collecting something about me, they tell me how they wish to use it. And I say, okay, well, if it's going to help me get from A to Q a lot quicker, well then by all means, please let's enter that arrangement, so to speak, and let's move forward so that I can have an easier day, or my family can have an easier time finding better healthcare and getting better services from that. I think the last bit is that the other side of that is that if you do start moving forward utilizing data without the clarity, then you start breaking that trust. And I think you said it earlier, that's when consumers have the ability to move on and go somewhere else. So it's a very fragile state to be in, to where we see these as like more burdens, but really think about it as the gateways rather than burdens, and the things that you need to do to not only keep your brand as high thought as you'd like it to, but to be able to execute more cleanly as a marketer, I think is the biggest piece, so that you don't constantly have to worry about, am I doing what's allowed with this data? It should be very clear. This is what you can do with this data. This is why they consented to it. And then operations move a lot smoothly from there.
Absolutely. And you said the two magic words when it comes to consent and patient engagement, right? Transparency and trust. Organizations, they need to ask themselves, would I assume consent if this were my own data or my loved one's data? Would I take any chances with the data in such scenarios? There has to be the full transparency with the consumer on what data is being collected about the consumer and how this collected data will be processed and how will it be used. And consent has to be explicit from the consumer. It can't be treated as implicit. And also, consent isn't monolithic. Just because a customer or a patient, they're consenting to their data being collected, doesn't mean they're also consenting to that data being used for some unstated purpose. We can never assume that the data is okay to use in a certain way when it comes to patients and consumers, and that's how a lot of the run-ins with regulatory bodies happen. Awesome. We touched upon this a little bit, compliant analytics becoming a buzzword almost. We'll talk about that a bit. What do you think compliant analytics means? HIPAA compliant analytics And what does it mean for an organization to be doing analytics in a compliant fashion? Joe, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, we talked about the American Hospital Association, the AHA lawsuit ruling at the beginning, and I want to come back to that and dive into it with a lens of digital analytics because it's probably top of mind. And my opinion on the AHA lawsuit is that for the healthcare organizations that are serious about delivering on digital patient experience, ruling's not as important as it may seem on the surface. And here's why. So if the unauthenticated experience of page URLs and IP address is no longer an issue, who cares? Like when I think about the patient experience, I want to understand it from start to finish. And this starts with my web experience, often in an unauthenticated state, and then progresses into a patient portal or appointment booking and other functions that I need to do as a member or a patient. And so combining that data together gives you the insights that can lead to real personalization of the experience. And it needs to be done in a compliant analytics platform. The top digital analytics platforms, to support this are platforms that Tealium integrates really well with. That includes Amplitude, Adobe Customer Journey Analytics. And even in these platforms, you need to be careful about what you're doing, and you need to have good business reasons to collect data. So a sound strategy is imperative. And the other area to address is GA4. Right? Google has been clear that they will not sign a BAA to make it compliant with HIPAA, and you cannot send PHI to GA4. So one way to continue using GA4, and this would apply really to any vendor that's not HIPAA ready, that won't sign that BAA, would be to adjust how you are using it to ensure that no PHI data is being sent to it. And this means anonymizing the data that's being sent, adjusting how that data is sent, having the controls and so forth. And Tealium has the right technology to navigate all of this and to control the controls to prevent that data in terms of how it's being sent and where it can and cannot be sent.
That's definitely very insightful, and thanks for highlighting Tealium's capabilities when it comes to HIPAA compliant analytics and other things that lead organizations to become HIPAA compliant. And you're right, an AHA lawsuit does say that IP address and combined with the user's visit to an unauthenticated website, a mobile app, or some other digital property is not PHI. But even then, there was a slight wrinkle, right? So they're saying this data is not PHI if the visit is not related to the visitor's past, present, or future physical or mental health condition or payment for such health condition. Even then, right? So what this means is the ruling doesn't seem to cover all scenarios involving unauthenticated websites and mobile apps. By saying that thing about this is not PHI if it's not related to past, present, future healthcare, etc., what they're saying essentially is if it can be known or proven that the visitor is there for their own healthcare, in other words, if they're sending signal that indicates that no, they're not just there for research purposes, but they're there for healthcare for themselves, then the data may be considered PHI. So even within the unauthenticated scenario, there are a few catches and booby traps to watch out for. The ruling also doesn't address authenticated websites and mobile apps. This means there is plenty of PHI that will be generated, right, even within the unauthenticated scenario and authenticated websites and patient portals. So there'll be a lot of PHI that will be generated, and organizations need to be careful with how they collect this PHI and what they do with it. This means being able to control what data is getting sent to various analytics platforms downstream, as you said, is the key to becoming HIPAA compliant when it comes to analytics. This means having the ability to send consented PHI to technologies from vendors that do sign a BAA. These would be the Amplitudes and the Adobe Customer Journey Analytics of the world. It also means having the ability to send anonymized data to vendors such as GA4 who don't sign a BAA. Again, having that flexibility, being able to choose what data goes to which analytics platform is critical. Okay, so let's bring it all together. We're doing all these things, whether it's secure data collection, consent capture, and enforcement. We're doing all of this to earn the consumer's trust and serve them effectively. We talked about how personalization is necessary for healthcare organizations to evolve into the next stage in serving customers. What does a modern approach to creating consumer personalization look like? What does that mean to you? Richard, what do you think?
Yeah, so in the widest answer, it is basically improving experiences and possibly improving outcomes, right? I think that's the goal of every healthcare organization and the experiences they're trying to deliver. But if we get into more of the terminology and the strategies that I think of, zero-party data is a very popular term that I think most organizations should start with, right? It's basically asking questions so that you can guide someone to a path a lot easier. And one of the ones that I always think of in the healthcare scenario is as a caregiver, right? I'm not here actually trying to find information for myself. I'm trying to help someone that I take care of. So maybe that means send me to the call center because more information is needed in order for me to access certain services. Or, hey, actually, you're not tracking me as someone who's interested in these things. Understand that I'm helping someone else out and change that experience for me. So I think zero-party data is a good one to just start basically changing and delighting people by helping them find the services or the answers they're looking for. And as you go down the path, I mean, now we're getting the first-party data, right? And that's where we really create that bond of I am collecting or asking questions that are pertinent to you. And now I really need to deliver what I'm promising, which is that enhanced experience. And that's where your technologies really start playing together, because once you have those identifiers, the first party data, your systems start working more in concert and really delivering that unified 360-degree view that we're all hoping for, so that with every touch point, not only is it personalized, but it's also catered so that less questions have to be asked if I do call the call center. They possibly know why I'm calling that day, or when I access a gated content by logging in, there's better information provided back to me. And that's where the power of these data points, the power of your MarTech and your technologies come together. And really, you're creating that infrastructure for what that promise is, which is real-time reactions as you essentially engage more and being essentially driven to that possible better outcome for you.
I like the sound of real-time reactions. That's a nice ring to it. And I agree with you 100%. And I like how you emphasize zero-party data. And this is data that the visitor or the patient, whoever's coming to your property, your website, that they themselves are providing about them or about why they're there. And since we're talking about patients and healthcare consumers, then privacy and regulatory compliance become major factors, right, when dealing with them. This means any data that organizations themselves can collect on the patient during that interaction with your brand, especially data that the patients provide voluntarily, aka zero-party data, I think would be very useful both for future engagement and for privacy reasons. And it's also the reason, a great reason to create a compelling personalized experience where the patient feels heard, so they would be giving you more of their data that you can leverage, and it creates a virtuous cycle, if you will. And speaking of technology, technical infrastructure, again, that is a critical piece of the puzzle. And this is where I think a real-time CDP really shines. You need technology that can talk to your internal systems, whether it's an EHR system, a CRM, MDM, or whatever you use in your organization. And you need you need tech that can talk to these systems and act as a conduit that can pull data on your patients, on your visitors from these sources, make sense of this data on the fly, and then serve up relevant content and experiences on different touch points like websites, mobile apps, call center, etc., and do this all in real time to achieve the real-time reaction, as Rich mentioned. So why should organizations, why bother showing generic content to a patient when you already know the patient's preferences and where they are in their treatment journey currently? Why not meet them where they are? And why make a patient go through 5 different departments when they call into your call center, when you already know them, know their phone number, when you have the ability to identify who they are in real time using that phone number and direct them to their physician's office and save them a lot of time? That is what the CDP and the right technology ecosystem can unlock for you. And we talked about physician personalization a bit. Unlike patient engagement, where it might be safer in many cases to rely on patient data and first-party data that you yourselves are collecting, with physician engagement, there are rich third-party data sets available. What research are these physicians conducting? What their preferences are? What drove them to refer a patient to a particular organization in the past? Things like that. And there are even identity providers that are niche to the healthcare space that Tealium already partners with. using the identity technologies from these providers together with a real-time CDP means you can identify a physician when they come to, say, the referral page of your website or the job postings page of your website, and know where they are, tap into the insights you already have on them, and create a compelling experience that takes their pain points and past behavior into account. That would lead to better conversion in engaging our physicians in addition to patients. All right, let's maybe talk about how does this translate into the real world? Any real world customer success stories you could share?
Yeah, I'll share one. So we have a healthcare insurance provider client, and we have a great case study where we crafted a customer experience strategy that led to an experiment with the goal of reducing member friction. Member friction that would often lead to calling the call center. This is costly, right? So we launched an experiment that resulted in making digital self-help options more available. And the proof of concept quickly yielded a positive impact, projected annual savings of almost $200,000 just through some simple changes. So that's the type of experimentation that can lead to outsized results that are impactful to the experience.
It is fascinating, isn't it, how small little changes can have that outsized impact, as you mentioned. I guess that's the power of digital and personalization and engaging them in real time. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Great example. I think it's time for Q&A now. So see a few questions already. Awesome. What's a way a healthcare organization could provide value in exchange for consent? That's a good one, I think. I think we talked about listening to the patient, listening to the consumer in real time, looking for signals that sort of reveal who they are. And when they consent, using the data to provide something in real time. You may not have a lot of insights on the patient or the visitor, but look for signals that would help you create that in the moment experience. Again, that creates a virtuous cycle, I think. So in other words, give them a little and get more. Give them a little, get some more. I think it builds on itself. Do you gentlemen have anything to add to that?
Yeah, one idea would be like better. So in exchange for consent, you can offer better educational content that's tailored to the patient, right? So, maybe it's either even webinars that are tailored to speaking to, either a condition or something else that they're proactively opting into providing consent to get that better experience. So that's another idea, is that education component.
Got it. I see this question very interesting. So the FTC recently announced that hashing data is not a suitable solution. And two examples it cited were Better Health and Premor, two healthcare adjacent organizations. What is our POV on hashing PII, as well as widely known identifiers like device ID, MAC address, etc., both generally and for healthcare settings? So I would say it becomes PII if there is a real world equivalent. In other words, if that leads to identification of that visitor in the real world. So if they have expressed concerns around hashing, that could be because the hashing could be undone and the original source data could be deciphered. So I would say our POV would be that you are looking at generating something that can't be tied back to the individual. In other words, like a fake ID or a pseudo ID that has no real world equivalent. In other words, once it leaves your platform, it's completely meaningless. I think that's what you should be thinking about, individual identification, identifiers, if you're trying to achieve that sort of individual analytics or engagement. And the vendor can receive the data, they can try what they want with it, and it won't be meaningful at all. And even there are ways to do hashing, in my opinion. I mean, don't quote me on this. I think that's a question for somebody a bit more technical. But there are certain hashing algorithms that would be very hard to break. So if these can't be reverse engineered, I would imagine FTC's concerns are alleviated. But yeah, but great question. Yeah, I need to think about that some more. Yeah. Awesome. Let's see what else. I have a question, actually, if I may ask you that. One of the customers that I recently spoke to, or I heard from actually through another source, they said they believe creating audience segments using patient data for the purpose of marketing and engagement has a high risk of HIPAA violation. What's your take on this? I'm curious what you have to say about this. Rich, do you want to take this?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's also a good way to recap a lot of the things we've been talking about. So love the question. I think at face value, I don't agree with the statement. And like always accepting that there's more information that could be there that really changes my opinion, right? But at face value, like, no, clustering people so that you can simplify messaging or engagement is not a violation of HIPAA at face value. It's really, I think the two things to think about downstream is like, is the information you're using consented, right? I think that's one thing that's worried. Not so much a HIPAA violation, but are you starting to do things that you're not comfortable with in order to create those segments is one. And then the second piece would be, do you know whether or not the platforms, as we mentioned before with the BAA and other criteria, are they compliant to house that data or leverage the data to create those segments? And that's more about the data being sent to the system rather than even the effort of creating those segments, right? So there's a lot of things that are possibly underlying here, as well as understanding, I know you just went over the hashing question, but understanding what the vendor is doing with that data that you're sending them. Are they doing something that your legal team or your business doesn't agree with? And that could also uncover things to where that segmentation aspect also becomes questionable, right? So in the end, creating things to improve the experience and within all the acceptable criteria and legal criteria that you have, no, but is there a bunch of nuances that affect that opinion? 100%. We'd have to really dig into those.
Makes sense. Awesome. Thanks for that, Rich. Another question I see is the way you craft messaging in a pop-up for consent important? Do you recommend an A/B testing approach to try out different messages for consent pop-ups? Could using a different tone of voice help in certain scenarios compared to others? Do you have a take on this, either of you?
Yeah, never do anything without testing. You never want to hedge all your bets with one experience, right? I normally say try variations, select the one that wins, but also continue to optimize. That should be the mantra of any organization, not just healthcare, is like test, make sure you've done it right, ensure that people are going to interact with it. And it's creating the outcomes that you're also looking for. But once again, it's helping them find what they're looking for, right? So don't just also accept that the A/B test for someone engaging is the end of all measurements. You also have to think long tail. Is it also creating the conversions you're looking for? Is client satisfaction scores going up, right? These are all the things that you have to include with that. So also think about the long tail, because I think a lot of people don't include that as well.
And I'll just quickly add on that question is that, put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, especially around consent. These banners that we come across day in, day out, it's amazing the language that's being used on those. It's not as friendly to consumers as it should be. So keep that in mind.
Awesome. Thanks for that. The other question I see, thoughts on the impact that the overturn of the Chevron doctrine on healthcare's ability to use tracking. Do we have a take on this?
I haven't been asked this question yet, but I remember reading about this, and I guess my quick reaction is that I think in some cases it reinforces that you need to have a sound data foundation and strategy around all of the stuff that we talked about today. If anything, that's what this reinforces, because it can create some more complexities, because from what I'm recalling about this being overturned, that it could increase the judicial scrutiny of agency interpretations. And so that can result in less clear guidance around data privacy, tracking regulations, things like that. So I think it just reinforces a lot of the points that we had here today.
Absolutely. So that flexible framework that allows you to be nimble and change things rather than, having or trying to have a one size fits all approach. Be prepared to be agile. Be prepared to have the definition of PII and PHI changing over time. So when you have the flexible framework, I think a lot of these regulatory obligations you would be well equipped to handle, I would imagine.
And just doing those other aspects around governance with being clear about what you're doing and honoring that relationship that you have with the consumer.
Absolutely. And different organizations may have a different level of risk tolerance as well, correct? So I would say work closely with your legal team, with your privacy and compliance team. They are your allies in all of this. Keep them in the loop. Do you agree with that?
100%.
All right. I see no other questions. I think we can wrap up, unless you have anything to add. Nope. I think we've covered all the important highlights. Thank you so much, Joe and Rich. Much appreciated. Thank you for a fantastic discussion. And thank you all for listening.
For having us.
Bye. You're welcome. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.